It was the love affair between a humble squire and a queen of England that changed history and founded the most famous royal dynasty of them all. But what do we really know about the life of Owen Tudor, the obscure Welshman who stole the heart of Catherine of Valois? Stay tuned to hear about their scandalous and ultimately tragic relationship, plus Owen's famous last words, gory end, and the bizarre way a local madwoman treated his head after his death. Owen Tudor was born in around 1400, the son of Maredudd ap Tudor Fichan and his wife Margaret, who was from Anglesey and who may have married each other in around 1399. His full name, following the Welsh patronymic naming practices of the day but using the English pronunciations because I'm not good at Welsh, was Owen ap Maredudd ap Tudor, meaning Owen, son of Maredudd, son of Tudor. We don't know exactly where he was born, other than that it was surely in Wales. We also don't have any pictures of him, so the ones you'll see in this video are for illustrative purposes only. The story that his father was an alehouse keeper is likely false, for Maredudd was actually a local Welsh government administrator who was its Tudor of Anglesey from 1388 to 1391 and a burgess of Newborough. But nothing is known of him after either 1404 or 1406, sources vary, so he presumably died when Owen was still a child. Much later, when Owen's great-grandson Henry VIII was on the throne, there would be a concerted effort to talk up the great-grandfather's pedigree and qualities, but you might want to take with a pinch of salt the claims from Polydore Virgil writing in the 1510s that he was noble by breeding and wonderful for his virtues, and could trace his lineage to Cadwallader, the last British king, or those from Edward Hull that Owen was a goodly gentleman and a beautiful person, garnished with many goodly gifts both of nature and of grace, who was a man brought forth and come of the noble lineage and ancient line of Cadwallader, the last king of the Britons. There is an unverified story that Owen had a sister called Annes, who married Sir William Norris of Cheshire, but otherwise we know next to nothing about his youth. This lack of firm information has led to a number of legends and guesses about his early life springing up over time. One story runs that after his father's death, he was entrusted to the care of Sir John Scudamore of Troy, and certainly he and his son of the same name had long-standing links with the Tudor family during the lives of Owen's sons and grandson Henry VII. Other stories place Owen at the Battle of Agincourt in 1415 and say that he became a squire to the English king Henry V, but there is no contemporary evidence to back them up, though he would have been the correct age for such a position. King Henry's brother, Humphrey, Duke of Gloucester, did have an archer called Owen ap Maredudd that year, so perhaps that was him, as it was only much later in life that it became usual to refer to him by the name Tudor only. 5 years later, there was an Owen ap Maredudd working as a man-at-arms under Henry V's other brother, John, Duke of Bedford. Could this be another glimpse of our Owen? We'll never know for sure, but according to the Oxford Dictionary of National Biography, quote, in May 1421, Owen Maredudd joined the retinue of Sir Walter Hungerford, steward of the king's household, 1415-21, to serve in France. And this was definitely our guy. In fact, this is our first certain look at him. Terry Breverton, whose biography of Owen, linked below, was one of the sources I used for this video, suggests that it was in Hungerford's service that young Tudor came to court when Hungerford was Henry V's steward from 1415 until 1421, and the infant Henry VI steward for a few months in 1424. If this is true, he might have had the opportunity to meet Henry V's wife and Henry VI's mother, the French princess Catherine of Valois, who Henry V married in 1420 and who would eventually become Owen's wife too. There is some suggestion that he also obtained a job working in her wardrobe department, but as with so much in Owen's life, the details are hazy. A later Welsh chronicler, Ellis Griffith, who was only born in 1490, said that Owen was a sewer or maybe a server in the Queen's household too. The long and short of it is that we don't actually know how these two became romantically entangled, or exactly when. If you'd like to hear my review of Breverton's book, by the way, consider joining my Patreon site, where it will be available to my top 2 tiers of patrons, or you can purchase it as a one-off if you don't fancy a monthly subscription. The link is in the description box for you and in the pinned comment, and we have a great little community over there which I think you'd enjoy being a part of. You can also like and hype this video here on YouTube and subscribe to the channel for free to get updates on my latest uploads, and become a channel member to get members-only posts and badges next to your comments. Catherine of Valois was born in 1401 and had been widowed and left with a young child at the age of 20. She was apparently keen to remarry, and by 1425 her eye had fallen on Edmund Beaufort, brother of John Beaufort, Duke of Somerset, leading in 1426 to a petition in Parliament which asked that dowager queens be allowed to remarry where they chose upon payment of a fine. This request was denied by her young son's government, which instead barred queens in the 1427-28 session from remarrying without the permission of an adult king, on pain of forfeiture of all the lands and goods of their new husbands. The threat of forfeiture seems to have killed off the affair with Beaufort, but it does tell us that the relationship with Owen Tudor likely doesn't predate 1428, as the government's bar on her remarriage is always taken to refer to her interest in Beaufort, who, unlike Owen Tudor, actually had a meaningful amount of lands and money to be lost. Giles' chronicle went so far as to say that Catherine was unable, quote, to curb fully her carnal passions, but in the absence of any solid information, we have only legends about the beginning of her affair with Owen. An elegy written after his death says that he fell into Catherine's lap whilst drunk at a dance. Ellis Griffith says that she and her lady saw him swimming and she fell for him then, after switching clothes with her maid so she could meet him without him knowing who she was. That story has a sting in the tail though, as according to it, Owen tried to kiss her, wounding her face when she refused, but was forgiven after finding out her real identity whilst serving her at dinner the next day. Honestly, that doesn't sound realistic to me unless it happened on literally his first day at court, otherwise he would surely have already known what Catherine looked like, no matter what clothes she wore. They are also reputed to have met at Windsor Castle, but we don't actually know how, when and where their relationship started. The best I can tell you is that at some point between 1428 and 1432, the pair were married. As Catherine stayed in her son Henry's household until 1430, maybe even a little later, that might suggest that the marriage took place after she left and moved to Hertfordshire. Catherine and Owen would have 2 sons for sure, called Edmund and Jasper, and some sources, including the London Chronicle, the much later work of Polydore Virgil, and the even later Hall's Chronicle, both written during the reign of Henry VIII, reported 3 or 4. Virgil said there was a third son, quote, who became a Benedictine monk and died not long thereafter, while Hall added that the man had lived in Westminster Abbey. Other sources say his name was Owen, like his father, though it would be a little odd that the father's name was only given to the third son and not the first. Mind you, the name Jasper is pretty strange too, so who knows what was going on there. There may also have been a short-lived daughter, quote, which in her youth departed out of this transitory life, says Hall, though you'll read elsewhere that she survived long enough to become a nun, and even that her name was Margaret. Personally, I harbour some doubts about these children's existences, but the possibility of a younger Owen Tudor seems the most likely, as we have evidence that money was given to him in 1498 by Henry VII, and there is a note of his death in 1501. The fact that Polydore Virgil, writing barely a decade later, knew about him also suggests there might be something to the story, though his existence is still disputed. There certainly doesn't seem to be any agreement amongst modern historians as to whether these 2 extra children were real, as the various authors I looked at whilst researching this video put forth a variety of opinions, so I leave it up to you whether you believe in their existence or not. The dates of birth of any offspring are not known for certain, but Edmund is believed to have arrived in circa 1430 at Haddam and Jasper in circa 1431 at Hatfield, though S.B. Crimes, who wrote a biography of Henry VII, thought they were younger than that, given that they weren't knighted until 1449, which he thought quite late if they were born at the start of the 1430s. Their parents' marriage was not common knowledge until after Catherine's death on the 3rd of January 1437, but it must have been known about in certain circles by 1432, because in that year, to quote Catherine's Oxford DNB entry by Michael Jones, Owen Tudor was given the rights of an Englishman to protect him from earlier anti-alien legislation. In March 1434, Catherine openly granted him various favours on her Flintshire lands. Obviously, Catherine's household will have known about her pregnancies and younger children, especially as she and Owen seem to have raised them together at first, and I can tell you that their marriage was always viewed as legitimate, as were Edmund and Jasper, despite the fact that some, including the late John Ashdown Hill, have speculated that they were actually Edmund Beaufort's sons, which would mean that the Tudor dynasty actually weren't Tudors at all. This is based on a fairly weak interpretation of their coats of arms though, which Ashdown Hill felt looked like Beaufort arms instead of having anything to do with Tudor. Terry Breverton, however, points out that the boys' arms, quote, simply show their close relationship to the royal house. The fact that the marriage and the children were seen as legitimate at the time is proved by the fact that even Richard III, in his later efforts to discredit Owen's grandson, the future Henry VII, did not claim that Henry's father Edmund was base-born, though he slandered other branches of Henry's genealogy that were. Given the secrecy around the Valois-Tudor union, I can't really tell you anything else about it. But as I've mentioned, it came to an end with Catherine's death on the 3rd of January 1437 at the age of 36. Her will reported that she had been suffering from a grievous malady in the which I have been long and yet am troubled and vexed, and she had removed to Bermondsey Abbey before her demise. Whether Owen was with her at the end, I can't tell you, but he must have known how ill she was and seen her health deteriorating over the final months of her life. She was buried in Westminster Abbey near her first husband, and her original grave elegy made no mention of her second marriage or younger children, thus erasing Owen, Edmund and Jasper from her story. Much later, in either Henry VII or Henry VIII's time, a new one was written which did mention Owen and Edmund, though not Jasper or any other children. Her remains, by the way, ultimately went on quite the disturbing adventure over the course of several centuries, and you can hear all about it in my video about her corpse, which I'll leave linked for you. What of her widower, though? In January 1437, Henry VI was still a minor, and it was his Regency Council with whom his stepfather would have to reckon for his crime of marrying a dowager queen without permission, and they were in no mood to go easy on him, it seems. The king's uncle, the Duke of Gloucester, summoned Owen to come before the royal council, promising him safe conduct. Owen, who was then in Northamptonshire, perhaps trying to get to Wales, was initially reluctant to show up, wanting written assurances that he would be free to come and go. Eventually, though, he came to London, only to immediately enter sanctuary in Westminster Abbey. We don't know exactly what he was afraid of and why, but that was an extraordinary step to take and suggests genuine fear for his safety. He eventually agreed to meet the king and his council at Kennington Palace, now gone, in July, where he swore he was innocent of any crime and was loyal to the monarch. He was ultimately allowed to leave and tried to get to Anglesey, but he was arrested en route supposedly for having broken the king's safe conduct which had been promised to him upon his release. Now this doesn't really make sense because Owen had only ever been offered a safe conduct verbally, not in writing, and he hadn't even accepted it, so I think we can see it as an excuse to get him into custody. The real reasons for his arrest are no longer clear, but Sarah Ellen Roberts posits in her biography of Jasper Tudor that there were fears in the council that Owen had some malicious purpose and imagination in mind, and that a rebellion or some other unpleasantness might occur if he was free. He was imprisoned in Newgate, where he was, according to some reports, kept in irons. His goods, totalling £137, 10 shillings, 4d, were forfeited. This shows that Owen had not benefited financially from his marriage nearly as much as you might think. That sum is only worth a modest £135,673 in today's money, which is not much when you consider his wife had been a queen. His possessions, which had likely come from Catherine, included items such as gilt cups, 6 silver salt cellars, silver candlesticks, and basins. Things were not looking good, but Owen was a survivor, much like his son Jasper and grandson Henry would later prove to be, and he escaped from prison in January or February 1438 with his priest and a servant, a fact which might suggest that he wasn't actually in irons. The London Chronicle had this to say of his getaway. This same year, one Owen, no man of birth, neither of livelihood, Owen brake out of Newgate, Irons, don't know what that means, night at searching time, through help of his priest, and went his way, hurting foul his keeper. In other words, I think he had to assault his jailer, and badly too, in order to escape. This sequence of events is supported by the Polychronicon Ranulphi Higden, which also confirms that it was a short-lived burst of freedom. The London Chronicle goes on to say that, at the last, blessed be God, he was taken again, and the Polychronicon adds that he was recaptured by John Lord Beaumont. The sum of £89 was found on Owen's priest at that time. Then Tudor was sent back to the same prison by late March and transferred to Windsor on the 14th of July, where he was placed in the care of Edmund Beaufort. He was released a year later on a £2,000 main prize, which is like bail, and ultimately pardoned on the 12th of November that same year, with the main prize cancelled on New Year's Day 1440. The worst certainly seemed to be behind him, and with King Henry now acting as an adult and no longer under the control of a regency government, Owen's treatment continued to improve. He was given a pension of £100 per annum, plus other cash gifts as time went on, and allowed to join his stepson's household by 1444, where he was referred to as the king's friend. He did not get to retain custody of his children, though. Edmund and Jasper, who were known by the surname ap Maredudd ap Tudor, though really it should have been ap Owen ap Maredudd, were placed in the care of Catherine de la Pole, Abbess of Barking Abbey in Essex, and their expenses paid by their half-brother, the king. They stayed there until 1442, then disappear from the records for a decade, though it is possible that they went back to their father during some or all of this time. Owen Jr., if he existed, will have been at Westminster Abbey. Now hopefully your family tree isn't as complicated as the Tudors was, but if you have Irish ancestry and would like to learn more about it, you might want to check out my book Find Your Irish Ancestors online, which aims to help you do just what the title suggests, and which is available as an ebook and paperback from Amazon. I'll leave the info below for you. For some free bonus material from me, you can also join my mailing list at historycallingofficial.com and get my newsletter and 2 free downloads, which will help you to spot bad history books before you buy or read them and interview your family members about your genealogy. Owen now lived a respectable life in England and France. He witnessed charters, he was appointed the captain of the small number of troops defending Regneville Castle in France in 1444, perhaps as a sign of favour, perhaps to keep him out of England, and he likely went with the retinue sent to collect the new queen, Margaret of Anjou, in 1445, as the Chancellor was ordered in that year to reimburse him for his expenses. He would stay in Normandy until 1449, when the French attacked the castle and he was forced to surrender it after a 6-day siege. He then returned to England. There, his sons, Edmund and Jasper, were knighted in 1449 and created the Earls of Richmond and Pembroke respectively in November 1452, another sign that there were no doubts over either of their paternities. They were also named the premier earls in England. In other words, they outranked everyone in the aristocracy except the handful of dukes in the country. Edmund was also allowed to marry the wealthy heiress Lady Margaret Beaufort in 1455, though she was only 12 years old. This marriage is also evidence that Edmund really was a Tudor, not a Beaufort, for if Edmund Beaufort was his real father, then he and Margaret would have been first cousins and required a dispensation for the marriage which spelt out that fact. The new Countess of Richmond became pregnant soon after her marriage, but Edmund wouldn't live to see his son and Owen's grandson, Henry Tudor. Instead, having been captured whilst campaigning in Wales, he died of illness, possibly plague, at Carmarthen on the 3rd of November 1456 and was buried in the nearby Greyfriars. His son was born nearly 3 months later on the 28th of January 1457 in Jasper's stronghold, Pembroke Castle. We don't know if he ever met his grandfather Owen, after whom he was apparently named at first, according to Ellis Griffith, only for Margaret to insist on the name Henry after the current king. Had he been using the Welsh patronymic system, by the way, he would have been called Henry ap Edmund ap Owen, and we would never have had a Tudor dynasty. By this stage, the Wars of the Roses were becoming an issue for the Tudors and England in general. I have a whole playlist on this topic, which I'll link for you, and I'm not going to get pulled into a detailed discussion of the conflict here, or the video would last several hours. It was, in short, a struggle between two branches of the Plantagenet family, known as the Yorks, who sometimes used a white rose as one of their badges, and the Lancastrians, who sometimes used a red rose. Henry VI was of the House of Lancaster, and therefore so were his brothers and their father Owen, and his cousin Richard, Duke of York, father of the future Edward IV, who was then known as the Earl of March, was on the opposing side, and determined to inherit the throne in place of King Henry's young son, the Prince of Wales. York had even been made protector of the realm when King Henry had a mental breakdown in 1453 prior to the prince's birth, which left him unable to even recognise the baby when it was presented to him, and from which he did not recover until late 1454. After the Battle of St Albans in May 1455, which York forces won, the Duke ultimately again took control as protector from November that year until February 1456, even though it is not clear that the king had collapsed once more. The two sides stumbled on for the next few years, with relations between them deteriorating despite some efforts to improve them, and by the end of the decade, all-out war looked inevitable. In 1459, Owen became a father again, this time to an illegitimate son called David Owen, born at Pembroke and whose mother is unknown, and you'll note that David did use the patronymic naming system from Wales because his surname was Owen, not Tudor. The place of his birth suggests that Owen Sr. must have been staying in his son's castle in that year, or perhaps in 1458. David, who died in around 1542, would go to the trouble in his will of paying to have masses said for the souls of Edmund and Jasper, as well as their father, strongly suggesting once again that Edmund and Jasper really were his half-brothers and not the children of Edmund Beaufort, otherwise they would not have been related to him at all. Owen Sr. would have even less to do with this child's life than he had with his older sons, though, for he was to die while this little boy was still a baby. In March 1459, Owen and Jasper are recorded as having headed a commission to arrest Yorkist supporters in Carmarthenshire as relations between the two sides continued to sink. The Battle of Blore Heath on the 23rd of September 1459 was won by the Yorks, but just weeks later they were defeated at the Battle of Ludford Bridge on the 12th of October, and the Duke of York was forced to flee to Ireland and send his son, Edward Earl of March, to Calais. York was attainted by Parliament and most of his goods forfeited, as were those of some of his supporters. Owen benefited from this, receiving a £100 annuity that December from manors formerly owned by John Baron Clinton, and the following March he was able to take out a 7-year lease on 7 of Clinton's former manors. The Oxford DNB adds that in February 1460, he and Jasper were granted for life offices in the Duke of York's lordship of Denbigh as a prelude to seizing the lordship. Jasper had to besiege the castle of Denbigh in order to make good on his grant as its new constable, but he successfully took it in the spring of 1460, having been granted an army to do so. All in all, life was looking pretty good for Owen and his son, but it wasn't to last. The tables turned again in July 1460 when March returned from Calais and won the Battle of Northampton. King Henry was taken prisoner, Queen Margaret was forced to flee to Wales to Jasper and later went to Scotland with her son. The Earl of Pembroke was ordered to surrender Denbigh Castle to the Yorkists, but refused. An Act of Accord was then passed on the 31st of October, which recognised York as the heir to the throne after Henry's death, which was even worse news for Owen, Jasper and little Henry, whose fortunes were all bound up with the king's. York's victory didn't last long, though. He travelled north, set up base in Sandal Castle, and for reasons which remain unclear to this day, left the safety of its walls on the 30th of December and was killed by Lancastrian forces at the Battle of Wakefield alongside one of his sons, the Earl of Rutland. As for Owen Tudor, he was with Jasper and his army, chasing the 18-year-old Edward Earl of March, who was then at Shrewsbury and who was probably aiming to attack Wales from there. The two sides met in battle on the 2nd or possibly the 3rd of February 1461 at Mortimer's Cross, and the Tudors lost. Jasper managed to escape from the battlefield, but Owen was captured. It was the end of the line for the man who had risen from fairly obscure Welsh squire or minor nobleman to be the husband of a queen and stepfather of a king. The Earl of March, who was technically now the Duke of York, but no one ever really refers to him as such, had him executed on the 7th of February at Hereford. Gregory's Chronicle gives us an account of Owen's final moments, and if you want to see some tough-to-read medieval English, turn on the subtitles for this one, because it is a headache to read. And in that journey was Owen Tudor taken, and brought unto Hereford est, and he was beheaded at the market-place, and his head set upon the highest grace of the market-cross, and a mad woman combed his hair and washed away the blood of his face, and she got candles and set about him burning more than 100. This Owen Tudor was father unto the Earl of Pembroke, and had wedded Queen Catherine, King Henry VI's mother, weening and trusting always that he should not be beheaded till he saw the axe and block, and when he was in his doublet he trusted on pardon and grace till the collar of his red velvet doublet was ripped off. Then he said, "That head shall lie on the stock that was wont to lie on Queen Catherine's lap," and put his heart and mind wholly unto God, and full meekly took his death. So despite the fact that the Lancastrians had killed Lord March's father and brother barely 2 months earlier, Owen had expected mercy on account of his royal connections right up until the last moment, and when the end came, it was supposedly Catherine of whom he thought. His body, I don't know if this included his head, was buried in the chapel of the Greyfriars Church in Hereford, and a memorial was later erected at the expense of his last son David, but that church is long since gone, as are his remains. He was about 61 years of age at the time of his demise. The following month, Edward of March was declared Edward IV, and Jasper and eventually little Henry Tudor would end up in exile in mainland Europe during much of the next 25 years, until eventually Henry would succeed in wresting the throne from Edward's brother Richard III in 1485 and becoming Henry VII. Through him, Owen is the ancestor of every royal to sit on the throne of England, later Britain, from that point onwards, plus the final few independent Scottish monarchs and numerous other European royal houses, including 5 kings of France, several consorts, kaisers of Germany, czars of Russia, and many more. It's quite the legacy. I hope you enjoy hearing about the humble and unlikely progenitor of the Tudor dynasty. Let me know in the comments what you would ask Owen if you were able to put just one question about his life to him. And before I go, a quick thank you to those of you who support the channel using the thanks button underneath videos. For more on Owen's family, see my videos on what happened to Catherine of Valois' body, the mystery daughter or daughters of Jasper Tudor, and of course the remarkable lives of Henry VII and his mother Margaret. Whatever you choose, please enjoy, and until next time, keep learning.